Hey, welcome to the Pig Daily, guys. It is Pig here, and it is the 22nd of August, and today we're going to be talking about looking at replays and how to learn from replays. So we're going back to beginner basics. It's the first time in like a month we've done a beginner basics episode. But even if you're a diamond player or masters player, there's usually a few nuggets in here for you guys to pick up on as well. So as much as I do try to keep my explanations in these episodes focused on players who are brand new to the game, so literally, you can pick up the game instantly, watch one of these videos and get a lot of useful points. We are going to try and have some deeper nuggets, and we're going to talk a bit about, learning from replays as you get higher on in the game and that sort of stuff as well. So it should be a good topic, and looks like technology appears to be working. The mic is working. Hey chat, what's happening, guys? Thanks for hanging out. All right, so what are we going to be talking about? Well, we're talking about learning from replays. And specifically, not necessarily copying a pro replay. I'm talking about analyzing your own replays, how to break them down, where to find what to improve on, and most importantly, how to focus on the most important things. There's so many times I see people like really lost in a matchup, especially when you see those like really ragey, angry forum posts where someone's like, no, when this happens in this matchup, and they have this like really long kind of convoluted explanation of like a specific scenario. They'll be like, and Protoss just come with the 4 adepts and they kill 12 drones at least every time, and then they just have carriers and like ZVP is broken. You'll be like, doesn't really sound like every ZVP ever. And you'll always see people, the first response, the most upvoted response, especially if it's Reddit, is always just like, replay, please post a replay so we can actually see what the hell you're talking about. Because people get emotional when they play, they start to just kind of look at things in the most, in kind of ways where they're focusing more on the traumatic things that have happened to them in game rather than the actual objective kind of facts of what's going on. So I think analyzing replays and kind of learning how to break them down and look back at your own play after the game and actually give yourself a bit more of an analytical viewpoint is something which is so vital to learning in StarCraft. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about that. So first of all, you want to learn from your loss. Most people who say, okay, I analyze my replays, I hop in there. What's the first thing I see whenever I ask someone to analyze one of their own replays? They kind of just zoom through the start, talking in very vague terms about their game plan and how they open up. And usually, number one, there's very little focus on the economy. And this goes right through to high-level players as well. They go, I drone up, I spend my money. Like that's, I'm in Masters. And they don't talk too much about the specifics. So in terms of refining your efficiency early on, that's something people gloss over. But people almost always spend 90% of their time in replays looking at the last engagement or the last couple of engagements. And they just kind of really focus in on the fights. And they say, oh, if I was positioned here, this could have worked out. Or if I could have got him from this angle, that would have worked out. So I feel like there's this natural magnetism towards the engagements in StarCraft where we really want to look at how we could engage better. And what you've got to remember is this isn't Company of Heroes. This isn't a Total War game or something like that. Like most of this game is macro, or at least a large portion of it is. So while looking at those fights is useful, don't get me wrong, it is. It's a small part of the huge tasty pie that is StarCraft. So what we want to be talking about today is, first of all, go back in your replays and you want to find the first mistakes that happen. You want to find the mistakes earlier in the games when they're worth more. Why are they worth more? Because your economy is smaller in the early game. If you miss out on killing 2 workers you should have killed out of an economy that's only 20 workers strong, that's 10% of their economy you missed out on destroying. That's a big amount. That's going to slow down their build-up throughout the entire game. If you miss out on a few drone kills, 8 minutes into the game when your opponent has 50, 60, 70 workers, it doesn't really matter. It's a drop in the ocean. So you always want to go back and look at things that happened early on, not just harassment, but also macro. You'll always hear people say, let's look at macro. Let's see what we can do better. And that's why that is the first thing you want to look at in your own games. You want to analyze your macro, you want to break it down, and you want to have a few different techniques in order to figure that out. So we've literally just grabbed one of my random Terran replays. I'm like, 4.8k, 5k. I don't think I'm even 5. I'd be like 4.8, 4.7k MMR on NA. So like mid-masters kind of level. Not particularly fantastic, and definitely not very clean play. But what we are going to look at is a few techniques that I can use just generally in any replay as any race to analyze my macro. First things first, why is macro so important? It's you spending your money, obviously. So if you have units out, sorry, that sounds a little bit loud. Let me turn that down just a little bit. There we go. So if you've spent your money, if you've built a bunch of units and your opponent hasn't spent that money yet, well, you're going to have your units out faster. It allows you to get position, it allows you to do damage. It's a very simple mathematical equation of spending your money means getting more stuff means killing stuff. So it just kind of generally works out. What can we do first of all to analyze that macro, analyze that spending? Well, with Terran and Protoss, you want to always be looking for constant worker production. So the very first thing you want to be looking at is your production tab. And this is just your basic production tab check. You can just go up to 4 times speed in a replay, and we can do this right from the start. You can do this from like 2 minutes in, or even earlier, and you can say constant SCV production should be happening. Now obviously I was upgrading an orbital command center there. That was the one moment where I didn't need to be constantly building SCVs. But otherwise, and you can even stop distracting yourself by going to a corner of the map, and I can literally just stare at this SCV production counter, and I can go, are there any gaps? And we can see, okay, there's one or two very small ones there. Oh, naughty gap. There's a naughty gap there. It wasn't massive though, was it? And then you got to keep in mind, okay, there's a second command center finished. The mules are dropping there, so we should always have 2 SCVs building at a time now. And you can see that it's all reasonably good and nice, but you really want to be watching this for a long time. Now, you want to check this out right up until you have 3 bases saturated, at least about 60 workers. As Terran, it's okay to be a little bit lighter on workers than Protoss and Zerg because your mules naturally kind of mine your bases out quicker. We're going to do a little video about muling and that sort of stuff at a later date. But generally, right up until you get that number of workers, unless you're doing a very specific all-in attack, with your standard macro play, you just want to be constantly building SCVs. If you're someone who's very new to the game, you really just play on 2 bases, you very rarely take a third, well, think about what is your 2 base saturation mark. So let's take a look at that. It would be 16 workers on minerals, 6 on gas. So it's 22 workers per base. So it's 22 workers on 1 base, 44 workers on 2 bases, 66 on 3 bases. And that's something we want to be watching for. We can see here only 1 SCV building, just for a few seconds there. And you can literally just see, here we go, first big gap. There we go, there's about 10 seconds where we weren't building any SCVs. Keep in mind we're on 4 times speed. And this seems a little bit boring, but you'll notice big gaps in this. It'll be much easier to identify these mistakes when you're starting out. And now that the fighting's starting, you see I'm pressuring, we're going to see more and more of these SCV production gaps from me, because my production really freezes up sometimes. Because my Terran play is very rusty and not the best. But we see here now more and more of these gaps in this SCV production. And this is where you start to actually clue onto something. This is where you start to identify an issue, a mistake, something that's gone wrong. And that's really what you're looking for. You're not simply looking at this and saying, bam, build more SCVs. I wasn't building SCVs enough. Try to also identify where your mistakes come from in your games. So what you want to be talking about is, what I want to be talking about, and I'm going to go and talk about how you do this as Zerg, because obviously Zerg's different, but you analyze this the exact same way for Protoss, where you just look for constant worker production. Just look at what's going on. Remember I mentioned there that I started to harass a lot. I started to attack. So because I've got more things to do, I'm more distracted, I start to make more mistakes, because I've just got more things to do with my APM. So what we can do here is we can say, okay, let's go back to during this pressure, and let's actually get inside our own head, and let's think about how we're multitasking at this point. Alright, and we're keeping an eye on that production tab. Alright, so we're picking up those medevacs, we're going to drop them there, we're sending some a tank evac down to help out, dropping a 3rd CC, and notice as well, guys, by the way, if you're ever watching a replay and you've been clicking on things...
Into the mouth. Nice.
Thank you very much, kind Mitleid. Appreciate that. I hope you guys enjoy the new sub noise. I think it was Eon Blue who suggested that. I can't remember. Either way, that's the first time it's actually come on, so that kind of freaked me out. What was I saying? So if you've clicked on something, you've clicked on, say, an engineering bay, right? It'll show up down here, and the problem with that is even if you're on your camera in a replay, you're not going to see what you're clicking on. So this little button down here, You can also press escape, it does the same thing, but I always use the button. It's actually really cute. That's just going to clear your selection, and that's going to allow you, by watching down here, to really get inside the head of the player you're watching, or get inside your own head. Nice. And nice. And yeah, basically we're going to see exactly where my focus is. And we see now only one SCV in production. And when he finishes, we don't even have another one queued up. So I'm like scanning the fourth. I'm looking at his third because his third had no workers. I go back, I build a gas. And now I queue up some SCVs. It's like, okay, it's not too bad. You know, I had a pretty good kind of back and forth flow there. So, you know, a slight gap there is fine. You don't want to be too hard on yourself where you're like, you miss SCVs for 2 seconds. And then you're like, oh my god, this is unacceptable. I'm never going to make it, guys. I'm never going to be a good player. It's like, no, it's fine. It's actually completely fine. You can watch the best players in the world screw up massively, you know, because they're doing a lot with their micro. If you're not attacking at the same time and you're missing SCVs, that's where you want to be hard on yourself. But what can we say? Is we can say to ourselves, well, why didn't we queue up a few more SCVs? Remember this moment? So you can look at it, and you can kind of look at it through your own eyes, and you can say, well, just before here, I'm going to go back. There we go. Here we go. So at this point, I go back. Why am I not queuing up more SCVs? Like just then, I only queued up one SCV. I've got heaps of minerals. And I'm also doing something else which I'm failing at. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Before we go too deep on analyzing what went wrong here with my multitasking, let's take a look also at the other thing which you can look at. And now, first of all, Zerg. How do you identify if you're not kind of doing stuff constantly as Zerg, building workers constantly? Well, Zerg's very different because you build your workers in waves. So you don't really look at it in terms of constant worker production. You look at it just in terms of constant larva production. Now, it's kind of cool with Terran and Protoss because you get to split up workers and units. So you get to do 2 very different checks to figure out how well you're macroing. With Zerg, it's just the one check. So how about we finish with Terran and Protoss first, and then we'll talk about the Zerg one. So let's hop back in game. Now, what's the other check? The other check is your production tab check, but not for SCVs, it's for unit production, keeping in mind specifically how much unit production you have. Now, there are certain points in builds. For instance, this is a 2-1-1. The starport after the first 2 medevacs very rarely, or almost never, has constant medevac production. Sometimes your tech structures, as Terran, in the early stages, they'll build 1 or 2 very important tech units, and then they kind of freeze up on production simply because you can't afford to build units out of it constantly, and that's okay. However, with barracks, these guys should be constantly building. So let's go back to about that 5-minute mark, 4 minutes 50 or so, when we're kind of picking up with our first 2 medevacs. We're heading across the map, and let's take a look at this and say, okay, let's once again do that 4 times speed production tab check, but let's keep in mind we've got a reactor and a tech lab. We should be building 3 Marines at a time. So we can go 4 times speed, and we can take a look at that production tab. And this seems so kind of mundane, but like this really is how you check that you're being good. Where are the Marines? Where are the Marines right now? I've got minerals, but I'm not building Marines. Oh, somebody has shit macro. And I think his name is PiG. There we go. The Marines do start up again, but the SCVs stop. Marines queue up, some SCVs queue up, but still only 2 Marines at a time. I've got heaps of minerals here. Now this is something which you do, but you want to adjust this, remember, based on how many barracks you have. So if I had 5 barracks right now, 4 reactors and a tech lab.
Nice.
Thank you very much, Rock Sullivan. If you had 4 reactors in a tech lab, you'd want to be building 9 Marines at a time. So this is something where you can just check that constant unit production. Now, likewise, with Protoss, it's the same as Terran. Protoss and Terran both work in a very similar way. However, one exception, guys, if you do get to Platinum and above with Protoss, you start to do what we call powering more and more. And Terran players do this sometimes as well. That's actually what I was touching on with the starport and the factory there, is the idea that sometimes you can't really afford to keep building these units. With Terran, it usually only happens with the starport and the factory. Your barracks are almost always constantly producing. However, with Protoss, even your regular gateways, once you hit a certain point in the game, a certain skill level, should not always be producing. This is called powering. Now, powering is all about cutting unit production temporarily in order to add more tech, more upgrades, and more overall production facilities so that you can explode into into those units, into those higher tech units, into those higher tech upgrades a little bit later in the game. Now, of course, that has to be an educated decision. You can't just go into game and say, I'm just going to not build units off my 5 gateways for the next 5 minutes, doop-de-doop, which is why we don't recommend this to players up to Platinum League. Up to that league, you probably should be producing out of your gateways most of the time. But once you get Platinum, Diamond, further, and as you push further and further, you get a better sense for the matchups. You start to scout the situations you're in. You get to understand, oh, my opponent's all inning. I need to constantly produce out of my gateways and actually add more gateways. Or, you know what, my opponent's taking his 3rd command center. I don't need to constantly build out of these gateways. I just need to start building units after I've got my double forge and my extra 3 gateways down or something like that. You start to come up with these rules. So keep in mind, powering is something which you start to do more and more the further you get into the game as a Terran or Protoss player. As a Zerg, you absolutely never power. There is no powering. The closest thing to powering is building lots of drones rather than fighting units. So sorry guys, I did realize I accidentally left my follow alerts on. I thought I turned those off before, so I'm just going to turn those off really quickly so we don't have Arnie talking over the show. And let me just turn that off very quickly. All right, so that's not giving me the option to turn it off. Okay. That's why it didn't work before, because it's messed up on Twitch alerts, unfortunately. There we go. Got it. The website just didn't load correctly. All right, guys. So enough of Arnie talking about pumping iron. All right, so we've turned that off. Yeah, so as I was talking about, you want to power sometimes in StarCraft, right? So there's these moments where you want to power, but as a beginning player, you don't need to focus on that at all. You just need to focus on identifying these moments where you're constantly producing. Now let's swap over to the Zerg perspective in-game. And let's think about it from Zerg. Like I said, Zerg never powers. Zerg should always be producing. So with Zerg, it's a very simple check. It's super easy. All you want to do is watch the unit tab. Now, this is the one thing which tells you if a Zerg is messing up their macro. It is that units tab. And all you're looking for is lots of idle larva sitting there. Right now, 5 larva sitting there. They're just chilling. That was a bit of a hiccup in the macro. So once again, 4 times speed. And you want it, oh, there was one there, but it got spent straight away. So naturally it'll pump up, but as long as because the injects pop, but as long as it gets spent straight away, then it's okay for Zerg. But here, look, there's 14 larva just sitting there for quite a while. So you want to identify all of these points. Another 12 larva is sitting there, only 7 of it gets spent. There's another 8 larva. Lots of larva being floated by our Zerg player. And like I said, guys, you want to identify where do these mistakes come from? What's happened? So let's go back here. And let's identify that first one. So here at 7 larva, you go, oh my god, why are you floating 7 larva? And we see, oh, supply blocked. So what you want to identify is you say, you hit, you aren't spending your larva. Was it just a supply block? Yes, it was. Okay, why did we get supply blocked? You kind of go back a bit and you go, well, I just forgot to build an overlord. Sometimes it's as simple as that. It's like, well, that was just really sloppy. You can always add in your rules for yourself, like, make sure you've always got X supply free, or every time you build a round of units on 2 base, build 2 overlords. Every time you build a round of units on 3 base, build 3 overlords. There's lots of cool little rules that you can throw out for yourself. The important thing though is identifying where those hiccups happen and why. So here, 6 larva sitting there. This is going to be one where we see, oh, he just didn't actually have enough minerals. So check this out. All the lava's going to pop out of both hatcheries. And he just doesn't have any extra minerals. And you can say to yourself, oh, okay. As long as he spends that in the near aftermath, that's okay. And we can see, yeah, he's spending it. You know, his lava count's going down. So we can say, all right, Coffeeholic, you're doing a pretty good job here. But let's fast forward to where he really makes the big mistake with that 14 lava banking up. And I believe that's right as my attack is hitting. So, yeah. So we see here the double medevac comes over, starts to be nice and scary. And this is where it's going to happen. Alright, 14 lava just sitting there. 14 lava. 500 minerals in the bank. Most of that lava can be spent, but just not producing right now. And let's go into the camera. And you can identify, well, you just really panicked about this drop. You were like focusing on creep spread when you had 14 lava. Very bad prioritizing of what he should have been focusing on. And this is something people do. especially when the pressure's on with an attack like this, people start to prioritize the wrong things. They start to get excited and do things out of order. You want to kind of have like a set mechanical order where you're like, oh, I need to macro, like I need to do other things, and you go back and you do things in a certain order. With Zerg, it's a very obvious order. It's inject, 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 spend larva. Now, what we actually saw in this particular game is something which is very common with Zerg players under pressure, and that is he still did the injects, he just didn't do any of the other macro. This is something you'll see so many Zerg players do right up to a very high level. The moment they're under pressure, they just forget about everything else. Now, the Zerg macro cycle should be inject, then build units, then build overlords. Spreading creep can kind of happen on its own time. But what we often see is players go, oh, just inject, and then do that. So let's go back to where this happened, and let's take a look. So these injects are about to pop. They're beautifully timed out. Let's ignore the fighting that's going on. Check this out. Goes back, doesn't inject, does another inject. Heaps of lava sitting there, over 400 minerals the whole time, and starts building queens. Starts microing Zerglings, and starts putting down more creep tumors. A little bit panicked and a little bit thrown off by the pressure that's happening. And that's something you'll see happening all the time. Likewise, on my side of the equation, remember before we noticed that I kept pausing up on my marine production. There were a few points where I paused up on my SCV production as well. So if we swap back to the Terran perspective, I can identify the same thing, that I just kind of got out of the order of my macro. As Terran, the order that I like to macro in is number 1, build SCVs, drop mules. Number 2 is queue up units. So that'll always follow a set order for me, which is important factory and starport units. So medevacs, tanks, or medevacs and widow mines, then marauders, and then marines. And the reason you do it in that order is at the end of the macro cycle, you can just hold down that A key or whatever your marine hotkey is and just use the rest of your minerals on marines. And that's important because as your production ramps up and you're building 9 or 10 or 12 or 14 marines at a time, you don't want to be going and pressing that 10, 14 times every 30 seconds in the game. It's a complete waste of your time. It's a massive waste of APM. So by doing it in that order, I have an efficient way that allows me to kind of spend my money very well. But we'll notice that that goes to crap the moment the fighting starts. So let's watch from my point of view here in game. And we're going to try and hone in on the next time I go back to macro. Just taking a nice little trade on the Zerglings there, and here we go. We're going to go back to macro. Okay. Alright, so this is us going back to macro. And obviously you need to throw down extra facilities and swap add-ons around as well. But let's take a look. Okay. So let's go back and let's break that down action by action. I'm going to pause as we go. So here we go. First of all, selecting command centers and queuing up SCVs. Now, it's okay to queue up 2 SCVs per command center. That's completely fine because especially as the game heats up, you're not going to be able to look back at your base all that often. And it's very important to keep up SCV production. In this particular scenario, we just queued up 1 extra. So there was 2 on each orbital. That's fine. We then grab 2 SCVs. And we realize, oh, we don't want those SCVs. Let's go build a command center. Whoa, 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 whoa. We've just jumped from the equivalent of the injecting phase, remember? How we said Zergs love to just inject and then just forget about their macro once there's action going on. We just did the exact same thing. We went back, we built SCVs. I don't know if we dropped mules. I don't think we had energy, but we probably would have dropped mules if we could have. And then we're just like, cool, macro is done. Let's build command centers and buildings. It's like, no, you've got to queue up marines. You've got to queue up those medevacs and tanks, first of all. I've got to add combat shields, which I've completely forgotten this game, I believe. Yep, I've completely forgotten combat shields. So there's so many different things which I'm just kind of completely forgetting about here. And there we go. I'm adding marines on the end of the cycle. And that's completely out of order. Now, this is something which is pretty high level, and it's not the most important thing as a rookie player. But for me, and the way I like to macro, it actually is very important. Because I'll notice that for the rest of the game, in the points where I'm in control, I'm macro in that clean order, and I'm faster, I'm more precise about it. But not just that, because I do it in the same way every game, it happens without me even thinking about it. I'm watching the minimap. Like, I'm not even watching my macro. I'm looking at the minimap. I'm thinking about what I need to be worrying about next. I'm thinking kind of 2 steps further into the game. Whereas the moment I start macroing out of order, my full focus is like, oh, I need to build Marines. Oh, I need to add a depot because everything's out of order suddenly. And that's where things start to fall apart because suddenly I'm not watching my minimap and a counterattack runs into my third and I don't realize in time to spread my SCVs and the banelings kill everything. So there's these sort of little rules you make for yourself which you need to be very tight on following and adhering to in order to kind of get the most out of your units. So simply by identifying where I've made macro errors using these basic errors, and like I said, sometimes it's as simple as build more overlords, keep up marine production, but you can go a lot deeper and do what I've just done and say, you know what, I'm not following my general rule, my general structure of macro, or what we call a macro cycle. I'm breaking away from that the moment the action starts, and that's a bad habit. So let's remember next time, even no matter how fast-paced the game is, slow down, stick to that macro cycle, train myself to do that so I can get the most out of my APM. All right. So that's a very important point. Let's just leave this on my camera here in game for a minute. And we've talked a lot about identifying where macro mistakes happen. All three races, like I said, checking constant worker production, is a fantastic thing, but also checking constant unit production per the number of facilities you have. As Zerg, like I said, it's just constantly spending your larva, and you can check that throughout the entire game. It doesn't matter how many hatcheries you have. It's always obvious when you've got a whole lot of larva banked up that you aren't using. So it's generally something which is pretty easy to kind of check on. Another Protoss specific one is Chrono Boost. You can always check your Chrono Boost. Even the Neebs of the world, even the Zests and the Deers are all still really bad at moving their Chrono Boost around constantly. So it's not like it's something where if you're in Bronze League as Protoss, it really matters that much. But it's StarCraft. It's a game of edges. You're looking for every edge. A 15% production boost on an upgrade or something is very important. So just zooming through a replay, checking you're moving that Chrono Boost around as you should, is also something you can kind of take a glance at and see how it works. So, all right. Yeah, guys, so you also want to throw out some benchmarks for yourself as well. This is something, you know, if you have a specific build order or a game plan, you want to be using that as much as possible. So to wrap up this session, I want you guys to start throwing out questions, throwing out any queries, or your own kind of thoughts. Let's have a little discussion. We'll just have a very quick one at the end of the episode because we don't want it to go too long. But do start throwing those out in Twitch chat with the @x5_pig tag. And to finish up before that, what we're going to talk about now is learning a build order, writing down a build order, and then kind of benchmarking and adhering to a game plan. And this is something which is quite important. And then to finish off, I guess we can talk about engages very briefly. Though engages really is the least important thing. As I said at the start, engages is what everyone naturally looks at, and I think most people have pretty decent intuition when it comes to engages, at like learning how the different attack angles work. So that's actually the thing I feel like people need. Thank you, the revelations. That is nice. But yeah, basically it's one of those things I think we'll still touch on, but what we really want to talk about now is 100%. Sorry, that Twitch chat just cracking me up a little bit. Okay, so yeah. I'm just kind of losing my train of thought, like the crazy person that I am. Choose the most important parts of your game to check on. Benchmarking. Okay, guys. So I very quickly did want to run you through how to write up a build order. So this is something which is very personal, but this is one of the best skills you can get as a StarCraft player, even as a beginner, to help structure your understanding of the game. So it's a really great exercise to go in, whether it's copied off a pro build, or if you've written it down yourself, but to start to get the idea of kind of getting a good game plan down, writing out a build order. So you can look through an opening, and you can actually write down a build order. So let's very quickly look at this early game, what I'm doing, because it's the same sort of build, and let's take a glance at how I've written this up off a few pro VODs. So,
upgrade.
Reaper opening, straight into second barracks after command center. Second depot, reactor goes down after the Reaper. Second gas goes down. We're then going to put a factory down. Now, you're then going to add a tech lab on that barracks. Constant marine production.
Upgrade.
Reactor and a starport. Stim starts. Starport and factory swap. Factory adds a tech lab. 2 medevacs come out. 2 medevacs load up with about 15 Marines and a Reaper, and they boost across the map. Now, how the hell do you remember that as a new player? That's one of those things, right? These build orders seem incredibly complex in StarCraft, especially I think Terran build orders with the add-on swaps get very confusing for newer players. So what can you do in order to kind of consolidate that information? Well, writing out a build order really does help you learn, and really just kind of, focusing in on that build order. So as I said, I'm going to show you guys my own kind of written up notes, and it's quite personal how you understand things, because it's kind of like writing your own shorthand in school or university or whatever. It's one of those things where you never really can understand someone else's shorthand when you read it. But we can see here. So I've got a YouTube VOD beyond holding Impact Sling Bane Bust, and I've written down some stuff. That's not the important stuff. What are we looking at? We're looking at the general build order that he uses in these games. Okay. So I've written, and when I first write, and this is back before I was even playing Terran in Legacy. So I've even written down these like little extra game timer things, which I don't even care about. That's like not even important. But notice how everything is just kind of relational. It's like second barracks after the command center. Now, I've missed out on the early opening build order. That's because that is given knowledge for me. That's something where to me it's obvious that you open up with a standard Reaper opening. I know how that works. If you don't know how that works, if you're a beginner player, you write out that whole, just learning that opening is something, which is worth kind of writing out and learning to the fine details as it is. But as you get better at understanding the builds and the openings, you start to kind of leave out all the information that you just take as a given, because otherwise you've just got too many words on a page. It's just too much extraneous crap kind of filling up a build order page. And then we basically just have the build order. It's basically barracks, then depot, we go Reaper, then a Marine, then a reactor. Really? He actually went a Marine in one of these builds. So this is a slightly different build order to here. At 100 gas, we get our factory and our second gas. We have the tech lab on the second barracks, we get stim. When the factory's at 100%, we build a starport, we build 2 medevacs, and then a double engineering bay. We get our third gas as the drop moves out. We get a third command center and a fourth gas at about 5 minutes 40. That's when that goes down. 6 minutes 40, we start to add all the extra barracks as the money comes in. And we steadily go up to 8 barracks production. Then we start adding liberators off just 5 gases once we've got a decent medevac count. And that's the build order there. But also with Terran, there's something which is very specific, which I find I need to have each building written down separately with its own list, or I find it very easy to lose track of exactly what it does at a certain point in the game. So I always like to have a list in the order that the barracks does stuff. The barracks builds a Reaper, in this case a Marine, with the one that we just watched, you go straight into reactor. Factory builds a reactor, it swaps with the starport, it pauses in production, and like I said, this is different to the build order we just saw. But then it builds a reactor after a pause. So it's very important that we don't need to rush that reactor straight away. We keep building reactors as they're needed, otherwise the factory is idle. So we make sure we specify that this factory basically just builds extra add-ons for the other production facilities that are going up. And that's very important. And the starport, we swap onto the reactor, we build 2 medevacs, we only build 1 medevac. Remember what I was talking about powering? So we already have built-in information about how much we like to power with this build, in that we cut 1 medevac after the first 2. And that information just helps us out so much to kind of memorize and understand the build. So learning how to write out a build order in terms of the key pieces of information is something, everyone writes it out differently, but it's this great exercise that you can do watching a pro replay, or even, just having your own game plan. And it's really good because then once you have that list, you can kind of say these are a few of the really important points, and you can look through your replay and you can check and you can be like, oh, let's take a look in game. Let's imagine we were trying to do that build. We can go back to the very start of it and we can be like, hey, wait a second. This was executed really badly because you know what? We forgot that Marine after this Reaper. We can look at this and be like, hey, we went straight into a reactor here. What the hell? There was meant to be a Marine that gets squeezed out. You can just make these basic little assessments. But I can look at the factory and I can say, did my factory do the right things with this build order? Yeah, it builds the reactor.
Upgrade complete.
Okay, that's all right. But then I can say, you know what? I went off build order. I built a tech lab here. And that's different to what I normally do. And you can start to kind of make these just general assessments of You know, was I following the build? Was I doing everything I was meant to? And you can come up with certain benchmarks as well. You can say like 6 minutes into the game, you should have your 3rd command center down. You should have 1-1 upgrade started. Your 2 medevacs should be pressuring, and you should have 2 barracks, your factory, your starport, all producing. Your wall-off should be like fully solid at your natural, and you can kind of have this like set position that you want to be to. So then you can also just check how well you're macroing by just fast forwarding to that point in the replay. Bam, you get there, you check what's going on, and if it looks good, then you know you're playing well. All right, guys, so just to finish off, I mean, that's benchmarking, kind of checking your game plan, writing down a build order. The last thing you want to look at is, of course, those engagements. So we're going to fast forward to a very specific point in this game where there's a big push, and we want to talk about fight analysis. So, big push coming down here, 12 minutes into the game. All right. So, it's very easy to just kind of, oh, okay, so I'm pushing onto creep. He's got Lingbane, I've got Marine Marauder. There's a couple Widow Mines in there, they're not really burrowed right now. Okay, there they are. And, alright. Clearing creep, waiting for that creep to recede. And it looks like he's going to go in, okay. Okay, just sending some Banelings in at first. Now he's going to come in with the rest. And, okay, we're kind of moving out of range of the Widow Mines and tanks, and looks like he overwhelms it. And is way up in supply now. Okay. Now this is something where there's so many things to look at in engagements, but remember, always look back to things that went wrong earlier in the game. This doesn't just apply to look at your macro 2 minutes into the game when you're looking at a battle at 13 minutes, but it also look at the build up to this fight. So I'm going to take a look back here and check this out. That was a 13-minute engagement. If we go back to about 12 minutes... Okay, so here we go. I was like defending some mutas and stuff. I actually just caught all of his mutalisks flying out in the middle of nowhere. Push timing starts, 11 minutes 30. Let's take a look around at one thing. Control A, the best thing in the game. Your army supply tab, look at that. 125 Terran army supply to 78 Zerg army supply. Are the upgrades even? My upgrades are actually ahead. I've had 2-2 for a while. 2-2 isn't finished for Zerg. It's very easy for me to just look at this using simply the army tab and the state of the upgrades. There's also an upgrade tab, which is G. To say, if I pushed right now into creep, I don't know if he could stop this. Yeah, Banelings are decent, but I'm really not sure if he would just have the numbers to take on this army. There's just so much more Terran. If I'm just spread out, then, you know, Zerg's going to get wrecked really hard. So... why didn't I push now? I mean, why am I so far ahead? Because he's got 84 drones. He's got a bunch of money in the bank as well. He hasn't been spending his money too well. I've only got 60 SCVs, but he's also almost got Ultras out, right? Which is this big power spike for Zerg. And he's got huge creep spread. Now, what really doesn't make sense here is I'm pretty much max, right? It's 11 minutes 30. Now, let's look at when the fighting actually starts. So is that fighting going to happen anytime soon? First engagement is a minute, an entire minute later. Now, what was I waiting for? Why wasn't I forcing the fight earlier? Let's take a look back in game, and we can start to draw some conclusions about that decision. 3-3 is almost done. Oh, was I waiting for 3-3? Okay, that kind of makes sense. You know, if I wait for 3-3 versus 2-2, as long as I hit before chitinous plating, turns out I won't actually hit. I'll have like a 15-second window. Maybe I'm making the assessment that I want to fight with 3-3 versus 2-2. Okay, that's kind of smart on one level. But that's a bit simplistic as well, because what else am I waiting for? I'm waiting for the creep to recede. The creep was like out here. I'm waiting for the creep to push back. The problem is, even a minute and a half later of him just massing out units and catching up in supply, his ultra's getting closer to finished, the creep is still on my entire army. As a result, those Banelings go and take a great trade. Here, Banelings take a great trade. Over and over again, his army just comes in and engages very well because of creep spread. Also, What's this? I ended up fighting right before 3-3. So always you want to break down engagements, you want to look at those specific things. Upgrades, number one. Did, when you force the fight or when you let the fight happen, make sense in terms of your upgrades? In this game, no. I actually pushed a little bit too early for that 3-3. Well, maybe I wanted to push back the creep first. In that case, I should have been on the edge of creep. I should have been further back. I shouldn't have been so deep on creep. I let him take these trades pre-3-3 on creep. I let him choose when he wanted to fight, and I just kind of set up and was like, hey, you can fight me whenever you want on your terms. Horrible decision. Absolutely horrible. Not only that, but we see that in hindsight, I maybe could have told that I was actually way up in army supply, that I was ahead in upgrades. And if I knew that, I would have just YOLO'd onto creep, had my army pre-spread, given no Fs whatsoever, and just kind of taken the fight out there. As it was though, we ended up from being up 50 army supply to suddenly being down army supply, up against ultras with chitinous plating, in a really desperate scenario. And we actually end up winning this game, but it's purely through luck and not through skill at all. It's through our opponent just, you know, kind of choking just a slight bit later on in the game. So it was definitely one of these things where you can look at these fights and you can say, well, why didn't I just shove really fast and just kill him? Well, maybe I didn't have the information to know that, but nonetheless, this 3-3 timing was very iffy. Whenever you're pushing with 3-3, it's always a little bit like, ugh. You know, you're giving a lot of time for Zerg to get ultras. So something I know from experience in the matchup, my own assessment, is very rarely are you waiting for 3-3 before you take a fight. If we go back, remember, I was almost maxed at 11 minutes 30. But by the time we get close to 3-3 finishing, I've been maxed for a while. I'm banking all this money. And the thing is, banking money, not good for me. The more time I give Zerg, the better for Zerg, because we know the Zerg has the stronger late game force. I'm not building ghosts. Where the hell am I going to take a 5th base? This map's impossible for me to take a 5th base. It's so far away. Yeah, I'm building some Liberators and ranged upgrades, but I'm not well set up for the late game. So for me to slow the game down, that favors Zerg. For me to slow the game down, it favors the guy who's not maxed already. So this decision didn't make sense. If I was afraid of the creep spread, what is another way I could have made this whole game plan work? Well, remember that creep spread was so scary. That seems to be a big part of what I was afraid of. Well, look at this mid game. These mutas, yes, they kind of scared me a little bit. They pinned me back, but they're not that scary. Once you've got 30 Marines out, couple tanks, 30 Marines, I don't need to take a fight on his side of the map, but I very easily could be pushing across at least to kind of this middle area, trying to maybe control the watchtower and just keep the creep back. And if I really am someone who's going to be afraid of the creep later on, if I want to push through this middle path, finding some point in the middle phase well before 2-2 finishes to actually push back that creep, super vital, super important. So you can start to say, you know what, next game, I'm going to experiment. I'm going to try pushing back that creep earlier on in the game, and that's what's going to allow me to have success in the matchup. All right, so there's lots of different assessments you can make, lots of different ways you can learn from those replays. All those kind of just studying your macro mistakes really are the most important ones. They make the absolute biggest difference in kind of developing yourself as a player, and they really help you out. All right, so let's take a look at Twitch chat. Let's answer one or two good questions. I know I've been dragging this show out quite a while, longer than I meant to. Okay, Diamond Tie says, Pig, what do you look for at 200 supply? Just the big engagements. Like we saw there at the end, it's about how you take the engagements, the upgrades. It's all about the unit compositions, and it becomes very complex to do with how you use your units at that stage of the game, as well as how you secure your economy and protect your economy. You know, it's very specific to each situation. 90% of games don't go to 200 supply, I'd say. So luckily, you know, everything we've talked about up to now are the more important points. So Pickles says, what should you do assuming you don't have tons of APM? Should you not micro units, or should you just pull back until you have finished your macro? That's a really good question. We spent a lot of time earlier in the show talking about that idea of, well, if I'm screwing up my macro while I'm microing, it really is a matter of slowing down to the rate of your APM. A lot of players try to play beyond their means. They're microing their 2 drops like a madman. They're clicking left, right, and center. Whoa, yeah, killed an extra 2 drones. What you learn to do is you learn to prioritize and be smart about it and play within your own means. Definitely you want to push to try and get as much as you can, you know, get done as possible. And sometimes you want to overstretch on that micro just to develop your micro and, you know, get better at it. So then later on you get better at doing that micro without kind of stressing yourself out as much. But most of the time what you do is you realize, I've got one Marine left in this drop. Is it really worth putting the APM into focus firing drones with that one Marine? Almost never. Whereas if you've got 8 Marines in an empty mineral line, it doesn't matter how much macro you've got to do at home. Yeah, you should definitely micro those Marines, because if you can stutter step those onto the drones, you can kill 20 drones in a few seconds. That's well worth delaying your macro by a few seconds. So it's very situational. It's something you learn to kind of guess based on time. Notice I was doing very generic pressure at the front of his base this game. There's the 2 medevacs came, the tank came. It was something where I just needed to slow down a tiny bit. And sometimes you just leave your units just outside of their range or just outside of their base. You say, well, they're not engaging me right now. I'm not pressuring at this exact moment. It still makes it very uncomfortable for your opponent having units outside their base. They're kind of like looking at it and stressing out and missing injects. And you can just say, okay, go back, do a full macro cycle. SCVs, drop mules, build units, make 2 depots, go back to the fighting. And then you can say, I've got a full 30 or 40 seconds to just focus on the micro before I should be looking back at your base. And like I said, it's not always perfect. Sometimes you focus for an extra 10 or 15 seconds on the fighting. That's not the end of the world, as long as you've done those full macro cycles. The reason most people get overwhelmed is, like I said, they do these kind of half-assed macro cycles where they still go back and inject, or they still go back and drop mules and build SCVs every 20, 30 seconds. The problem is they're not building the depots, they're not queuing up the units at the same time. They're only doing 1 or 2 of the macro tasks, they're not doing a full macro cycle, and that's what's really messing up their macro behind the attack. So really trying to kind of solidify that macro cycle, do it consistently, is one of the most important things. B Muffin says, why do you say you should build overlords after units? Is it just your preference? I want to avoid having too little money to build them after the units. It's my own preference. If you're someone who's like, I like to always build the overlords at the start of the cycle, just to make sure you don't miss out on the overlord, that's actually really smart. If that works for you, thumbs up. StarCraft is always a game where you should always be critical and do things your own way that makes sense to you. So that sort of decision to do that is actually exactly what you should be doing to develop your play. You never want to just completely blindly follow what people tell you to do in StarCraft. Obviously, you can follow pieces of advice, but you always want to apply your own thinking, your own kind of critical approach to it, because everyone thinks differently, everyone understands how to do things differently, and different styles of personality will simply favor doing things in a different way. All right, guys, so I think those are a few fantastic questions. I like what iCup Spec says. He says, one last question. He says, is it the incorrect approach to say that if I had more APM, I could have done better in a specific game? Absolutely. I really think there's players out there who I've seen with 80 APM who are in Master League, and they're smashing it. Especially as you get older players who are real RTS veterans, you get these guys who are like, and people sometimes don't realize, there's guys who are like, yeah, I have a family, I have kids, I'm, mid 40s or 50, and I'm top diamond or I'm mid master, and I only get to play a few games a week or a few games a day or whatever the case is, and they don't even necessarily, they're not the 14-year-old kid who's spamming every single button. Sometimes they do it with 60, 70 APM, but the thing is they're just very efficient and kind of focused in their approach. They'll kind of recognize they don't want to necessarily do a 4-pronged multi-attack while macroing off 100 drones at home. So they're like, well, I know I can't keep up with that. I don't have the speed. So they play within their own means as well. So yeah, I think it's really smart to just always look for efficiency in your play. There have been pro gamers. Firecake used to play with 110 APM for a long time. Daishi was another French player who used to play with quite low APM despite being Terran and having very good micro. So yeah, you can do a lot with it. All right, guys, so thank you very much for hanging out. I appreciate all the questions and everything. It was nice to kind of revisit a beginner basics episode, but not just beginner basics. This is something where we did go a lot deeper. Normally beginner basics, we stick with just the basics, but I like that at the start we had some kind of general macro stuff, which really does help beginners, but especially everyone. And then we kind of went deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole as we went on into some more in-depth analysis. So thank you guys for hanging out. I'm going to be laddering, so I'm going to throw a straw poll up for you guys on Twitch to vote what race you want me to play today. So get on that. For you guys on YouTube, thanks for hanging out. I'll see you guys all tomorrow. Don't forget to hug a watermelon, kick a cactus, and of course, punch a watermelon to the moon. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye and good night.